For professional advice with a personal touch, consult Fuller Landau, Chartered Professional Accountants and Business Advisors. Click on flmontreal.com.
7:06 on CJAD 800. Welcome to today's Entrepreneur, a program about the entrepreneurial spirit that drives Quebec business. My name is Dan Delmar, and filling in for Josh Miller of Fuller Landau tonight is Michael Newton. Michael, welcome to your yearly show.
Hey, Dan, how you doing?
Good,
Usually I get this job when Josh goes off to Hong Kong, but now he's out traipsing on the beach somewhere, so that's what he sends me in for.
Yeah, in lovely Mexico. So
Yeah,
have fun, Josh. He's probably listening in from a beautiful beachside bar right now. And with us this evening is Robert Raich, lawyer at Spiegel Sohmer. Robert, welcome to CJD.
Welcome, Dan.
So, guys, let's begin, as we usually do, by just chatting a bit about some of the entrepreneurial news, and we have a couple of stories to get to, Michael, and one that I'd like your thoughts on first is cyber insurance, and this is sort of a growing industry with hacking, which is costing now billions of dollars to major corporations and small businesses as well. So this is a kind of an interesting story in the Financial Post in the last day or so. For every 1,000 houses you insure, you have a rough idea about how many will burn. That is sort of the general, the
stats game.
Yeah, this is the stat they use for regular insurance. But when it comes to hacking, well, it's significantly more serious than that and becoming a lot more problematic. So what's becoming more popular is buying insurance to protect against the loss of these hacking events. In your experience, Michael, is this something that's becoming more common?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's one of those areas that I think is still in the infancy stage in terms of coverage and the extreme that the coverage is going to go to if it does happen. I think for you look at it from a professional firm services like ourselves, I mean, you're running two sides. One, you've got access to information on a very, very detailed personal information for clients. You also may be holding credit cards. You may be doing a number of things. Plus, if you're doing any consulting to the outside world in a technology environment, clearly you're potentially exposed in that area. And I don't think everybody really has a handle yet on what that's going to look like from a policy perspective, a coverage perspective, and you said 1 in 1,000 homes burn. The stats really is just kind of coming to the forefront. So it's going to be a very, very expensive proposition at the end of the day, and I'm not exactly sure where we're going to end up, but it's something everybody should at least be looking into at this point.
Insurance experts themselves are saying they don't really know where this is going. It's kind of a new market, so it remains to be seen how popular it's going to get. But they're pretty optimistic, it seems, as to the growth potential here, especially as we do more and more business online, and there become more and more issues, I guess, with cybersecurity, and it should be a concern, right? I mean, if you're going to protect your by an alarm at your business, you should
clearly, have you ever met an insurance exec who's not excited about the possibility of trying to sell a new product? And this is going to be a massive fear sale, I think, at the end of the day, which remains to be seen how much people take it. But I know that from a professional firm's environment, it really is fitting into your critical plan and your disaster plans, and a lot of people are really starting to get worried about it. At the end of the day, it's way deeper than what we would normally consider.
Robert, from your perspective, are you finding that this is becoming more and more of an issue, cybersecurity, for more companies?
Hasn't come to my attention other than it's sitting in a partners meeting saying, do we need it? And the answer was yes, so we're looking into it. I can only imagine that the pricing is going to be on the high side because they're going to assume the worst. But it will, I'm sure, shake out and be fair, but we're definitely looking at it for our own firm, and I assume all professional firms will be looking at it, just because the lawsuits could be out of control in terms of how much you could be sued, because people look at their own personal information and they take it quite seriously. So it's going to be an interesting dynamic how this develops.
Yeah, if the house burns, you know what the house was worth. It's an relatively easy market calculation. Clearly, from a cyber perspective, I mean, these could be, not only are you talking from a far-reaching effect of not being able to quantify, you're also talking about ransom, you're talking about being held to a number of things that we're just not used to doing. So it's, there's an evolution that's there. I would say anybody looking into it should be, if you're not looking into it, you should be, but tread very, very carefully.
Could you see that perhaps cyber insurance would be a staple for even small businesses, maybe in the next decade or so?
Yeah, anybody who's going to be handling anything that is going to be sensitive information. So, I mean, small business, unless you're only working with a cash register and cash, and if you're taking credit cards, you're going to be handling sensitive information. Somewhere in that exercise, you're going to have to protect how you store that information and then what the implications are at the end of the day.
Another story I'd like to run by you, a bit of a larger scope on this one. Based on some political events in the States and in Canada, the energy market is looking very different right now. And Obama, not exactly warm on pipelines, and this new Liberal government in Canada, not as enthusiastic as well as the previous government. Where does the energy sector sit at right now, in your view, Michael? Where is the future, and is there optimism?
I think the energy sector right now is sitting far right, hoping that the Republicans get in next year in the federal election in the U.S., which is going to change the whole face. Right now, you're dealing with a very conservative, mindset from Obama's government, who doesn't want to tread anywhere close to anything to do with an environmental factor. The unfortunate part from a Canada-U.S. trade relation is that their largest trading partner is now being snubbed in favor of some South American countries who are producing oil and pumping oil into the U.S., which normally would be coming from Canada. So I think Mr. Trudeau is now going to have a bit of a political quagmire to deal with on this end, and there's no doubt that I think a lot of the energy sector is going to be hoping that somebody on the right side of the equation gets into power next year in the U.S.
And Canada's, the majority of Canada's oil exports go to the States, and so what? Can you speak maybe to impacts beyond sort of the immediate? Beyond the energy companies and sort of the ripple effect it could have on Canada's economy.
Well, there's no doubt, as being an export-based company and the resource sector being one of our largest export commodities, we are always affected when somebody who buys our goods is not going to continue under the same method. I think there was a lot of proof that from an economic standpoint, the Keystone Pipeline was a positive move. But again, that's from a financial perspective. And I think a lot of people have used the political agenda to drive away any kind of economic agenda. And I'm not even sure that even beginning to try and take a stance on this is anywhere close to being a good political move on my part. Maybe, Robert, would you like to pipe in and see if
I believe it actually is going to be good for Canada, because price of oil may go up. Price of oil goes up, the Canadian dollar goes up. There's a direct relation between the two. It will, if Canada goes to an LNG, liquid natural gas pipeline to the Pacific coast and accesses Asia as opposed to the States. And remember, oil is fungible, meaning a drop of oil here is the same as a drop of oil there, even though it's categorized as dirty, which is nonsense. All this is Obama's legacy of changing the dynamic for climate change. This is just political. It's silly because, as I say, a drop of oil, a barrel of oil from Canada, from Venezuela, ultimately refined as the same barrel of oil. So if the price of oil goes up because of this, it's better for Canada. So I'm actually buying oil stocks as we speak because I think this is good for Canada. They got creamed and I'm in there buying. So, but I'm a contrarian anyways. But this is nothing more than political. And I won't even go into climate change and that politics because I'm not here to talk about politics. But a lot of that I think is nonsense too.
Well, we'll talk about that maybe after 8 o'clock on my show. But here's an interesting quote from Tom Pickering, who's the president and chief investment officer at Auspice Capital Investors. Talking about Obama's decision, he says the news will be used as a catalyst for action for Canadian energy instead of relying, he says, on Big Brother.
Interesting. I think at this point there's a lot of speculation. Nobody's too sure. And, I think Robert hit the nail on the head. It's called political legacy at this point. And Obama's upsetting an awful lot of people in his last year of power. And I am assuming he will continue to do so until he's graciously escorted from the White House after next year's election.
Coming up next, we'll talk about the business of law with Robert Raich of Spiegel Sohmer and all kinds of issues, including running the business day-to-day, marketing, HR as well. We'll talk about that later in the program. Today's Entrepreneur on CJAD 800. Michael Newton is sitting in for Josh Miller this evening. It's coming up to 7:15. Let's head over to the CJAD 800 Traffic Center with the latest. Here is Kira Yeager.
For professional advice with a personal touch, consult Fuller Landau, Chartered Professional Accountants and Business Advisors. Click on flmontreal.com.
7:19 on today's Entrepreneur, inspiring stories from outstanding business people. Dan Delmar, along with Fuller Landau's Michael Newton, in for Josh Miller tonight. And with us this evening, Robert Raich of Spiegel Sohmer. And Michael, we're talking about the business of law tonight on the program. Should be very interesting. And for those that don't know Spiegel Sohmer, Maître Raich, do you want to just give us a bit of a quick glimpse at what the firm is about and what kind of work that you do?
Well, we're a law firm, I would say close to 50 lawyers. I never quite can put a circle around it. We specialize in four main areas: tax is probably our biggest area, 20 lawyers in tax planning, all aspects, tax litigation, mergers and acquisition that goes hand in hand with tax, litigation, both personal litigation and commercial litigation, and real estate. So those are our 4 core areas. And then we have offshoots such as intellectual property, labor law. But those are the 4 main areas that we're involved with.
Yeah, one of the reasons to talk to Robert is it's funny because we both live in the professional services world, and everybody seems to forget that we actually run businesses. And funny enough, we are supposed to be making a few bucks at the end of the day while we're doing this. So if you go back, and Robert and I were talking about this earlier, where if you go back far enough, there was only a few people that ever actually looked at their professional offices as a business. Most people were more concerned about the professional practice component, practicing law, or in our case, practicing accounting or practicing tax or whatever the case was going to be, without recognizing that you need to run a corporate model in order to get it working. So when Robert and I were talking about this, I think the key that we were looking at is, Robert was managing partner for 28 years at Spiegel, going back to in the early 80s, I think, Robert, not to date you at all, but going back a few years. And, I said to him, when you started out, were you guys looking at it like a business? And your answer to me was?
At the beginning, when I started as managing partner, which I was a kid at the time, really business was the furthest thing away. It was doing an honorable profession. But I soon realized that if you didn't run it like a business, then you were doomed to lose your good lawyers. If you didn't pay them enough, there was somebody else going to pay them more. So over the years, our office, as well as other offices, developed a much more business-like model, as Michael said. For example, we started with a basic sheet every day. This is the cash in the bank. This is how much we received today. This is how much we paid out today. These are our obligations in the next 2 weeks. And that was available to everyone. It was available to all the lawyers, to all of the students. Secretaries could look at it. So everybody knew exactly where we stood. Then that led to monthly financial statements. So 3 days or 4 days after the end of the month, we knew the financial statements. This led to budgeting. Anyways, it turned into probably what all businesses do, budgets before the end of the year, monthly financial statements to know where we stand and deal with issues if things aren't going as well, and daily cash flow so everybody is at one-to-one with what's going on in the office. So it definitely changed and continues to evolve as a business, because if you don't run it as a business, you're doomed to failure.
100%. I mean, if you look back, and I've been managing partner at Fuller now for 12 years, and I look back at the access to information only going back 12 years, and the ability to get timely information to run, it took us time to get the information out to do what we have to do. And as we sit and we look at the metrics and follow the trending and do whatever you're going to do, which, by the way, we profess to our clients, we probably should do it ourselves. At the end of the day, you recognize that you're actually, you can do a lot of management if you're actually on top of things. And, I always used to joke that, we got a lot of really good practicing accountants or lawyers and firms that, independently on their own might not be in business for very long, but if they're put in the right environment with somebody taking charge, I think they succeed quite well. And I think, Robert, over the years, you guys have proven that so long as you run it like a business, you can be a very, very successful practice.
Well, this weekend, for example, was November 7th and 8th, and I was looking at my October 31st financial statements, year-to-date statements, the individual statements for all lawyers, both partners and non-partners. I circled some good and some bad, and things that I will deal with the managing partner at our upcoming partners meeting. And the information I received is no different than what any other partner received. So we believe in an open system where everybody sees full information.
We're joined by Robert Raich of Spiegel Sohmer. More about the business of law in a second here on Today's Entrepreneur at 7:23.
For professional advice with a personal touch, consult Fuller Landau, Chartered Professional Accountants and Business Advisors. Click on flmontreal.com.
Coming up to 7:27 on Today's Entrepreneur, we're joined by Robert Raich of Spiegel Sohmer. And here's a quick question about professionals and professionals starting businesses, Robert. Is it difficult sometimes to market as a professional? Of course, I'm sure as many orders you probably have some really tight regulations. How do you get around that? How do you put your name and your firm's name out there?
You go on CJD on the Entrepreneur Show, and you.
That'll help.
You're welcome, Robert.
Well, when I started out, for me, it was giving courses to accountants, because I realized that as a tax lawyer, my best source of business would be accountants. So I started teaching accountants tax law. So if they felt my course was worthwhile, then I would get referrals from the accountants. And if an accountant came, they had numerous clients. So that was a multiplier effect. So everyone has to find what is the best access to a potential client base. But I don't think things have really changed. I'm not so sure things like blogs and websites really help. I think it's the word of mouth. A referral from another client or a friend, especially another client, is worth its weight in gold as compared to just a cold advertising. You probably remember in the Gazette there were tombstones where a law firm would have just their name and then name of the partners underneath it, and that was somehow supposed to sell their firm. Never worked. It's really go out there, make yourself known, get involved in charities, get out, help the community, do free legal work, whatever it takes, and people will say, hey, those guys are good, or they could say you're bad, which obviously has a negative impact, but get your name out there, go on shows like this, give speeches, which I do regularly, give courses, write articles, and that's the way I did it, and I try to coach the people in my firm to do the same thing.
It's funny, we tried teaching lawyers once, but we could never get a word in.
Are accountants that much better?
No, not really. Well, it depends which one. Some of them are afraid of their own shadows. So.
We have about just a minute before news, Michael, but any thoughts on that question, on marketing yourself, perhaps, as a professional?
Yeah, I mean, if you go back to Robert saying the old tombstones, I mean, we were under pretty strict legislation for a long time when it came down to how you could advertise the firm and what you could say, and we're still pretty well controlled by our professional orders, though there are ways around it. The reality is it's reputation, it's credibility, especially in a city like Montreal, where it's not a big city. You do a good job, it gets out there. You do a bad job, sadly, it gets out there even quicker. But we're selling integrity, we're selling credibility, we're selling something that doesn't matter what I say in the paper is not going to sell at the end of the day. All I can do is put the name out there, and then you have to deliver the goods. You've no doubt.
Our guest this evening is Robert Raich, a lawyer at Spiegel Sohmer, partner as well, and we'll talk about other issues about running that firm as a business, and also human relations. We'll have a chat about that later on in the program here on Today's Entrepreneur at 7:30.
For professional advice with a personal touch, consult Fuller Landau, Chartered Professional Accountants and Business Advisors. Click on flmontreal.com.
7:35 on Today's Entrepreneur. Welcome back. This is a program about the entrepreneurial spirit that drives Quebec business. My name is Dan Delmar, and filling in for Fuller Landau's Josh Miller is Michael Newton. And we're joined by Robert Raich, a lawyer with Spiegel Sohmer. And earlier, we were talking about your involvement in the business. So you were, Robert, a managing partner. You decided to step down, to pass on the torch. Can you talk a bit about that process, perhaps why you chose that, and how that process went to sort of becoming, sort of stepping away from that role?
Well, after 28 years, and I was close to turning 60, I felt as now one of the older people in the firm, on a basis of our firm makeup, I had to pass the torch to someone younger. I had a partner in mind who had worked with me on the compensation committee that was at the time 36 or 37. So, of course, this had to be passed by the partnership as a whole, but I felt he was the strongest economically, financially, and could also continue his practice, because when I was managing partner, I had a full load as a lawyer, so I didn't just manage the firm. I was managing the firm almost when I could find the time, which isn't necessarily the best way. So Alex Dufresne, who now manages the firm, does more in terms of spending time managing the firm. He still has his own book of business, but things have transitioned, and I wanted the management to be looked at by somebody younger and somebody that had grown up with me in learning to manage, but now it's his own style.
Yeah, the managing partner role in firms is it's a little daunting at times. I mean, as Robert explains, I think you were doing the managing partner duties on nights and weekends when you weren't doing your regular day job, which was very common practice in a lot of professional firms. The evolution to a lot of the bigger firms now is going more to a more corporate model, not necessarily our mid-sized firm mentality, but it is more of a full-time corporate role, a CEO type perspective. I still split between a client base and between the managing partner duties. I wouldn't give up the client base, and it's not a power issue. It really is about the number of families that I work with, spending the time, and it keeps me fresh. And it's funny because when I took over as managing partner, I had one comment, and I said, why would you want to take on that role? And I said, well, I've been consulting to people for years. Maybe it's time I prove to myself that I can actually run a real business. So it takes on a new, but there's no doubt, Robert, that the challenges facing the evolution of the position of managing partner. I mean, we've always had HR issues. We've always had growth issues. We've always had, do you reach out? Where do you open an office? What do you do? But in a fast-paced world that we're living in now, I think it takes on a whole different meaning.
I don't know. I hear that every year. This is going to be the hardest year, and I think just people evolve, situations evolve, management evolves. So is it harder now? Perhaps, but I really don't think so. I think there's always been issues. You and I were talking when we had dinner today about some of the hard issues about aging partners and perhaps early signs of dementia amongst partners. How do you deal with that? That's a really hard issue. What do you find? How do you deal with somebody you think may have been stealing from you or you don't trust anymore? What happens if somebody simply doesn't want to work hard? Those issues have been around and will continue to be around. It is a faster paced world, but it always speeds up, and it's always the most important election or the hardest time or the most difficult time. I really don't believe that. I think that people manage according to the environment, but the issues are timeless in terms of what we have to or what a managing partner has to deal with.
Well, I think it's perfect because if you look at the issues, I mean, I started in the profession in '89, and I don't think the underlying issues have changed since 1959. When you get into it, really, what are you looking at? You're looking at people, right? We run a people business. We're not selling widgets.
I say we do two things. I have two things that I strive for, and I will absolutely hammer to every lawyer in the firm, which is service to clients. We're a service industry. There is nothing that is more important than servicing the clients. And second of all is recruiting top talent, because in order to service clients, you need the brains. And as I told you a story, we've recruited unilingual francophones and who are brilliant. They learned English quick enough, or unilingual English will learn French quick enough, but you cannot replace brains. So the talent issue is something that's near and dear to my heart. I'm still involved in recruiting, and servicing to clients is primordial. So if I get a complaint from a client that somebody hasn't returned a phone call in 3 days, I will walk into that partner's office or that associate's office and find out why.
So talk a little bit about the talent. I mean, there's no doubt that everybody's fighting for the same pool of people on an annual basis. You guys have a certain reputation, which will in and of itself draw people to the firm. But what are some of your recruiting techniques? When you go to universities, what are you looking for? What about lateral movement?
Well, when I go to the universities, I start with marks, because marks, you cannot lie. And if people have consistently done well at all levels of their education, including law school, they are definitely going to be likely to do the best in a law firm. Obviously, beside that, there's issues of could they attract clients? Could they engender confidence by clients? So there's other soft issues, but the real thing we look for is top marks, because we believe that's the best indication of being a good lawyer. Now, when we hire people laterally, which means from another law firm, that's a whole other dynamic, because they haven't grown up in the system. It's like a hockey player that's grown up in the Canadians farm system. You know what you're going to get because the kid has been there since he's 16. But when you hire somebody at 30 as a hockey player, you have to go a lot on faith. And especially in law firms, it's not like you can watch the person on TV every night and see if they score goals or they play their guts out. So lateral hires have been trickier, and people have stolen people from us. And I'd like to think we haven't stolen people, because I think it's a little bit unethical. But when we hire headhunters that go out and get lateral hires, we are a little more careful in that, as opposed to bringing the people through our own system, which usually starts in second or third year law school and goes right through the bar school, and we know what we're getting.
The ethics of hiring from other firms is an interesting one. I mean, we've watched it go from, as Robert said, and was finding it interesting. Kind of gave me the golden rule that you will not, steal from somebody that either has been a friend of the firm or that you've known for a long time. Kind of
if
that
I know
unwritten
somebody in
rule.
the firm that I would first call them, or I wouldn't even approach them, but who I would take from are people who've taken from me. And I've had almost, I wouldn't say physical fistfights, but close to it. And I remember somebody was with a senator, and I basically accused them of stealing somebody that we had groomed for 3 years. He says, "How could you do it in front of a senator?" And I used a few expletives, and I said, "Because you stole that guy."
Yeah.
And you and I talked about the economics of a young lawyer. You don't make money on a young lawyer for 2 years.
Yeah.
So after grooming somebody and helping them write memos and teaching them everything you know, and then just at that point they get plucked from you, is very upsetting.
It is. The ethics aren't there. I mean, we've gone from seeing headhunters calling to now actually having HR people within other firms calling our people directly. So people don't seem to care anymore. And, you're right. The economics of losing somebody is going to cost you 1 to 1.5 times their salary. So if you're paying somebody $100,000 on top of their salary, it's going to cost you another 100 to 150 in training time. That's a big kick at the can to have somebody else steal out of your pocket.
Robert, what's a common mistake that people who are running law firms make in terms of the business side anyway?
They aren't tough enough. They don't look at the numbers. There's been a few colossal collapses, and if you read the story of the collapses, they were expecting their billings to increase in the second half of the year. You don't run a business based on hope. Hope is not a strategy. You've got to look at monthly financial statements. And I would say the only time we ever were really scared was in the financial crisis of 2008, 2009. And I had just done a budget, and I immediately circled around and changed my budget, saying, I've got to change this because it looked like the end of the world, or at least a significant dent in law firm businesses. You've got to react. You've got to know how to react. You can't, as I say, hope is not a strategy. You've got to be on top of it. And that's why the daily, monthly budgets, all of those things, daily cash flows, monthly results, budgets in advance. It is a business.
It's like running a business. It's funny how that happens. While you're trying to do all the ethical sides, you got to make sure that you still have a pot the next day.
We've seen some of the headlines. The death of the big law firm. What do you think? Is that exaggerated?
No, I don't. I think that the big law firms are here to stay because they add something that a firm like ours could not. We cannot give clients global service, meaning if somebody has a problem in Africa, we're part of a network, but that is not the same as having a global law firm that has an office in Africa, an office in London, in Paris, in the States, multiple offices. So the big law firm on an international scale, I think, are here to stay. But I think good local talent who can underprice the big behemoths are also, there's a niche for them as well. So what we try to stick to what we do best. And we've actually had sessions where we say, how can we improve? Should we add new practice areas? Should we go into other parts of the law that we don't do now? And the answer was no. Let's bolster up the 4 areas that we're known for and we're good at, and let's just become the best in Montreal.
Robert Raich of Spiegel Sohmer joins us. Coming up, we'll talk about HR issues with Micheline Maillet of Fuller Landau. This is Today's Entrepreneur on CJAD 800 at 7:45. Let's head over to the CJAD 800 Traffic Center as we...
For professional advice with a personal touch, consult Fuller Landau, Chartered Professional Accountants and Business Advisors. Click on flmontreal.com.
7:50 on Today's Entrepreneur, inspiring stories from outstanding business people. Dan Delmar and Fuller Landau's Michael Newton in for Josh Miller tonight. And this evening, we have Robert Raich, a lawyer at Spiegel Sohmer. And we also welcome Micheline Maillet back to the program. She's an HR consultant at Fuller Landau. So welcome back, Micheline.
Thanks.
And we'll focus a little bit on HR from the perspective of professional firms. So one thing that came up in the conversation earlier, Michael, that was really interesting was the recruiting aspect and sometimes the rather aggressive manner in which some professional firms
you can use the word aggressive. I like to think of it as a tad unethical, but hey, these things happen.
So have you heard of stories like this before, Micheline? I mean, one firm calling another firm's HR department or just calling directly to the office saying, we want you?
Yeah, no, it definitely happens more and more today. And I think with easy access, like through social media, like LinkedIn and Facebook and all these different places, it's much easier to get in contact with people. It used to be that firms would kind of hide their staffing lists of as much as possible, and headhunters would try to find creative ways to get past the receptionist to try to identify the right person. But we're way, way past that today. I mean, it's very easy to find out who that key person you want is in that company and just contact them directly through social media.
Yeah, we're pretty much looking at an environment now where I know that anybody's going to top up whatever salary's out there by 10 points. I mean, it's a given. So because nobody's going to jump for dollar at the end of the day unless they're not happy with the job. So it's inevitable that there's going to be a premium paid, which, and Robert and I were talking about this before, when that premium starts to be paid, you end up with all of a sudden throwing your salary scales out of whack with everything that's there. So it's kind of a rejigging of the environment. But Micheline's 100% right. There's no doubt that the ease of access to people is there and will continue to be there. It's not going to get any better. So it really, when you get right down to it, Micheline, it really revolves around retaining the people that you have and the things that you're going to do to keep people happy where they are, because there's no way you can shield them from the outside world.
No, I mean, a happy employee won't leave. When you're at a certain salary, you're not going to leave for a few thousand more necessarily. I mean, yes, maybe a lot of people have a price, but within reason, a lot of people who are very happy in the position they're in, there's a certain stability with knowing where you work. A lot of people don't want to change just for the sake of changing. So I think as long as you consciously make sure that you're keeping people happy, I think that's a good key to preventing them from getting headhunted.
But I think what we're starting to see is a lot more dollars being spent on HR and the HR people. I mean, the reference to full-time equivalents, whereas, used to be able to get away with one HR person for 60, 70 people. Now you're getting 2 and 3, and the amount of time and energy being spent to maintain is the associated cost with a free market.
Now, back to retaining for a second, Micheline, because this is pretty interesting. What do you make of the challenges that professional firms have in terms of retaining employees? And I'll add perhaps retaining younger millennial employees that may be conditioned to want more perks, for example, that may be a little bit less common in professional firms?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think with the new generation, firms are built around kind of an older philosophy, I guess you could say. Like there's still a lot of emphasis on putting in time and putting in hours, because for professional firms, most of them, the revenues are directly linked to a certain extent with the number of hours people put in, even more so than maybe other types of businesses. So, but today it's, a lot of people care about their life outside of work, so a lot of people don't want to work necessarily the same amount of hours they did, or maybe just more flexibility in terms of when they can work them. Now with technology, really, a lot of people can work kind of from anywhere. So I think that's flexibility is really key when it comes to.
We're starting to see in a lot of professional firms is this smaller footprint per employee at the end of the day, hoping to not have as many people in the office to chew up the $40, $50, $60 a foot rental charges. You're getting to a basic floor plan where everybody has the same thing from partners to juniors. Long term, I guess maybe it's that's where it's going. I still kind of a little bit old fashioned when it comes to that, and I think you really need to still have an environment that people want to come to work. At the end of the day, you're still collaborating. Robert, I don't know about you guys, but you're still expecting to see people do some work once in a while physically, aren't you?
Well, we have targets for every lawyer, and when we do our budgets, we target hours, and if they aren't producing the hours, we talk to them. Obviously, there's issues, sick kids, sickness, age, but yes, definitely. To put somebody in a place where somebody else could be, they have to do at least a minimum amount of both work and good work, because you can put in work and it could be a waste of time work, or you could be very efficient. So we look at the efficiency factor as well as the hours themselves.
Are the budgets that you're setting for individuals working, are they, I would assume they're relatively high from a chargeable perspective?
No, they're not. They're reasonable. I would say that the typical lawyer in our firm, non-partner, is about 1,500 hours.
1,500 chargeable hours?
Yes, and partners probably realistically 1,200 to 1,300.
Okay.
Today's Entrepreneur on CJAD 800. In a moment, we'll have Robert Reich's one piece of advice for today's entrepreneur.
For professional advice with a personal touch, consult Fuller Landau, Chartered Professional Accountants and Business Advisors. Click on flmontreal.com.
We'll have Robert Reich's one piece of advice for today's entrepreneur in a moment, but first, final thoughts on HR issues when it comes to professional firms with Micheline Maillet of Fuller Landau. And Micheline, quickly, we only have about a minute or so, but focus, if you will, specifically on sort of the professional development, and how do you sort of effectively manage your human resources in a way that will make sure that this next generation generation coming in, as is the case with Spiegel Sohmer, can take over some of those management roles.
Well, I think in a profession where, specialty services, knowledge, and relationships are so key, it's even more important to make sure that you think about succession planning, mentoring, so making sure to conserve those relationships. So if ever you lose a person, whether it's a competitor or just, I always say if you get hit by a bus tomorrow, who's going to take your place? So I think it's always good to make sure you're thinking of these things in advance, because you lose somebody in a key specialty, it's like a company losing a product they're selling at the end of the day. So it's even more important.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, the transition is hard because, for most people, it's power, right? Knowledge is power, and certainly in a professional environment, knowledge is even more power. So between the client base and what's between your two ears is pretty much what you've built over the last 40 years. And trying to get people to pass that on is one of the challenges, as Robert was referring to before, in running a professional office, is that ability to, how do you deal with people that are starting to step down, retire, passions. What else do they have to do? I mean, Robert's a good example. Robert has a couple other odds and ends he likes to keep himself occupied with, so I'm not worried about him if he ever gets to that stage. But there are a lot of people that just kind of run out of things to do.
And usually, Robert, at the end of the program, we asked our guests what your one piece of advice for today's entrepreneur would be. Your thoughts?
2 pieces. Service your clients to the max, run your firm like a business, and you will have a very successful professional firm.
Robert Raich of Spiegel Sohmer, thanks so much for joining us tonight. And Micheline Maillet of Fuller Landau as well, thanks for joining us. And Michael, thanks. We'll maybe see you next year.
I just want to know how many more episodes I have to come to before you stop saying I'm filling in for Josh Miller.
Couple more.
Okay.
Thanks very much. Josh is back next week. The Exchange is next on CJAD 800. It's 8 o'clock.
Thanks, Dan.